Welcome to the CASAS EL Civics COAAP remote testing training webinar. That's a mouthful, but welcome. My name is Margaret Teskey. I'm one of the CASAS program specialists here in California. And I put this together along with Barbara Lehman, Lynn Robinson, and Kay Hartley, also program specialists. Hopefully you enjoy this and get some use out of it to prepare your remote assessments. Today, we're going to look at our goals and objectives. There's basically two big ones. The WIOA agency administrators should be able to identify and implement the agreements necessary for remote testing. And then COAAP assessors or instructors will be able to give the COAAP assessments remotely. So they need to be able to identify appropriate delivery procedures and tools for effective COAAP remote testing, and that's what we're up to today. Our agenda is to welcome you all. I know it's remote. That's the way we live these days. Welcome, and we'll be talking a little bit of overview and some benefits and challenges with remote testing. We'll move on to guidelines and talk a little bit about our Going Remote checklist for COAAP testing. We have agreements, training, and the best part, testing tips, recommended equipment, procedures, things we've learned from the field so far, and a little note about questions and comments at the end. So let's start with the overview. Benefits of remote testing along with COAAP remote testing is that it's great for students and teachers to see progress, to measure progress. It's the opportunity for our students who are in our remote classes, our distance learning classes, that have accomplished their 30+ hours towards learning a COAAP, learning the EL Civics objective, to get measured so that they get some feedback. And it helps keep them involved in their learning. It really helps our teachers provide closure and decisions possibly about the next level for the student. For the agency, it's a great time to build capacity, to establish some procedures and get staff trained this spring or this summer. Remote testing seems to be the wave of the future for distance learning, so we need to be prepared for the future. A lot of classes are going online and are staying online through the fall. So it's going to become a regular and essential part of our program. Actually, we had over 100 agencies in California volunteer to pilot. So it's great to have that. Challenges, however, are sometimes an equity concern. Assessors and students, do they have the technology? Do they know the technology? Do they have the appropriate devices that can help them do the test in the best manner possible? Some places are restricted to bandwidth, internet bandwidth. A lot of times there's competition with other people in the household, kids doing their Zoom trainings at home, and Wi-Fi access. If you need information more about Wi-Fi access, please contact OTAN. They're a great partner for that. Student tests environment may also be a challenge due to privacy. Maybe they need a quiet place to test without distractions. It's not always easy. Additional challenges come with how do we get all our assessors trained, what kind of agreements are needed, and then oral agreements for students. Test security is also an issue we'll address. So let's look at some test security measures. First of all, really local agencies are responsible to ensure the test security as much as possible. That's why we've developed remote testing agreements. We have one per agency for all the remote assessments, like pre and post testing, SIT assessments, COAAP assessments, government and history assessment. For assessors, we need one agreement per instructor or outside assessor, whoever's giving the test, and that's called a proctor testing agreement. For students, though, we decided an oral agreement would be fine, just making sure that the student gives us an oral agreement at the time of testing. Delivery of remote testing starts with the agency reviewing their current COAAPs they've chosen, figuring out maybe how to modify assessment delivery procedures. Remember that it's the procedures only, not the assessments. We retain the same tasks, the same rating scales, the same rubrics. You want to consider a range of technology that would be possible, from low tech to more higher tech. Some COAAPs can be delivered in fairly low tech fashion using just a standard or mobile phone. And of course, use the existing assessors that are used to doing COAAP assessing. That would be your teachers or maybe outside assessors. Testing environment's important. We know that will help with test security and to ensure that you get the student not copying something but doing it as a performance-based test. So the assessor needs to ensure that the student's alone and not getting assistance from others. If possible, it's great to have the student sweep the room with a video camera before and after the test session, either with a webcam or a cell phone. And then you want to provide for accommodations, just like you would in the classroom. Okay, so starting Monday, May 11th, we'll begin optional remote testing for COAAPs. So optional means you don't have to. This spring it's optional. It's a time for agencies to explore and experience and try to set their procedures, get everyone trained. So each agency accesses online and submits a remote testing agreement prior to testing. And at least one person from each agency completes or views this EL Civics COAAP remote test training. Thank you for coming. And each agency ensures that instructors and assessors are trained in remote testing, that they know about security measures, and they sign the proctor remote testing agreement. Each agency also needs to add their local procedures to their agency's local assessment policy. And that's appropriate if you're doing remote testing. Okay, something new for TE is that they're going to add a new checkbox that will be inserted when entering the results from the COAAP into TE. So you see here is a page where the student information was there. We blanked it out though. What date the assessment was given, what is the form number, the class, and then what's the score and whether the student passed. Then there'll be an additional checkbox that will indicate whether it was remote testing. And both the state, CDE, and the government, Octave, are interested in finding out how many of us are doing remote testing, whether it's really working. So this is important to have your data person knowledgeable about this and learning about it. And that'll be available at the end of May. So I'm sure you'll hear about it from us, from your program specialists in the future. Okay, let's look at some testing guidelines. The assessment delivery in your agency's existing COAAP can be modified for remote testing to be done on computers or smartphones or even lower tech solutions. The key requirement is hopefully the ability to see the student if possible, and definitely to interact with the student live in real time. Remote assessments can take place using a number of apps or platforms. These may include, but this is not an exclusive list. That's Zoom, WhatsApp, Google Duo, Skype, FaceTime, any of these type of interactive video recording doesn't need to be recorded, excuse me. Video viewing devices. Note that Zoom will allow you to assess multiple students at one time for written responses. Oral responses not appropriate, but written responses be great. You can assess multiple students by using breakout rooms. You might be able to practice, and it's highly recommended that you practice with a few students at first before moving to larger groups. You may also think of a way to use Zoom breakout rooms for oral assessment. Check with your program specialist about that if you're interested in doing that. Make sure to practice because it takes a little practice. Okay, the key is the ability to interact face-to-face with the student and the ability for the student to respond in real time. This is a performance-based testing, COAAPs. Want to practice the remote assessment using your chosen platform to make sure you adjust anything according to your needs. Let's look at test security. There's a few things to consider. First of all, again, all test takers need to orally agree not to break test rules and use no use of assistance. Okay? Each test taker should be identified, needs to be identified either by their ID or in some way that you know that student. If possible, it's great to look at the students, be able to see the student. Then you're sure it's the right person if you know the students. Otherwise, you need to have their ID. Test takers should not be near anyone else in the test environment. And again, test environment can be checked before and after by a little sweep of the room with a phone or a computer webcam. Responses, including written responses, need to be made in real time. And again, under the remote observation of the test administrator, test assessor. And with your students with special needs, be sure to follow accommodation guidelines on the CASAS website, but also the government guidelines for that. For instance, you might want to read or record the information in the scenarios to be able to give the assessment orally. Test takers who are unable to write, again, might need assessments delivered both orally and taken orally. We'll talk about what that looks like in a minute. Let's go through the highlights of our Going Remote checklist. The first thing, again, is to determine and agree on remote testing technology, procedures by each COAAP that your agency has chosen. You may not want to do all the COAAPs. Maybe you want to pick one or two just for this year. Pick some that are the most accessible and most secure to be able to adapt the procedures for. And again, do not adapt the assessment itself. Then your agency should complete the agency remote testing agreement. It's only one per agency, and that would be required. Then you want to train assessors and instructors in the remote testing procedures you've designed, and keep a signed Proctor remote testing agreement form for each of them on file for those who conduct the remote testing. You want to communicate with the test taker and students about their privacy, the test security, and receive their verbal confirmations. Going to capture any written work in the most secure manner possible, so that in order to complete the paper rating sheets and hand those off to the data person. Turn in test results to the data person for entry into TE and for storage. Remember, we need to keep 2 representative samples from each class, usually a pass and a fail, along with testing materials like illustrations, that kind of thing. Note that remote testing technology and procedures need to be added to your local assessment policy. So then you're ready to go remote. Okay. The agency remote testing agreement, it is necessary to be done prior to testing. It should be submitted to a program specialist and CDE regional consultant. Now it is online at the CASAS website, so you'll see that and go from there. The agreement actually covers all remote testing for your agency, everything at once. So CASAS pre-post, COAAPs, CIT, government and history tests, everything. And then the agency needs to agree to follow the CASAS guidelines for remote testing and provide an estimated start date for testing to begin. Assessors, it's a very short form. They're going to follow, they agree to follow all privacy, test security, technology, test environment, test administration requirements. And that's covered in the guidelines, the actual document. They will also need to document the student oral agreements. Students are not to get assistance from others and to follow all test rules. And then agencies should keep this on file with their local assessment policy. So these are the training tools and documents that you would need. This webinar to start with, the checklist within the guidelines. There is a remote testing FAQs for COAAPs and for CIT and for other testing. There's an agreement for agency remote testing agreement and the Proctor remote testing agreement. So you're going to look for these at the CASAS website. For COAAP information, I would generally look under the CASAS peer communities under EL Civics. There should be directions there for you. And if you have questions, please ask your program specialist. This is where you would find agreements for remote testing. Right now it's posted in training.casas.org. You'll see it under modules, CASAS remote testing. We have the agency remote testing agreement, Proctor remote testing agreement, and then the remote testing Proctor certification, which was for e-tests. So the first two agreements relate to COAAPs and other tests as well, but COAAPs. You don't need to do the third for COAAPs. Okay, let's go on to some testing tips. For written responses that are made on paper, it's great. The assessor needs to be watching that. And the assessor could actually score the test immediately on their rating sheet, or they could take a photo of the written response and write the rating sheet later. Students need to be advised, if they're going to be writing, to have some lined paper with a medium tip dark pen. That's the best to be able to take a picture of. If it's a strange color or too light of a pen, it won't come out as well. And if the student has a computer and a cell phone, that's an option for the student to be able to text the answer or send a picture to the teacher. Here's an example. Written responses could be made on paper while the assessor is watching and then displayed to the assessor using their camera, either web camera or cell phone camera. One-on-one responses can be made even through a chat feature, such as they have on Zoom. When a student makes written responses through the chat feature, that's a possibility. It can be captured. The chat can be captured and can be graded later. Remember that chat is appropriate for one-to-one testing, not for a group. You don't want students giving answers to other students in the chat box. Having specific line numbers such as 1A, 1B, 1C really helps you direct students to a specific location, perhaps on a form, and allows for easy identification of which item is being answered. Here's an example of a sample task sheet and a student-made answer sheet. So you see here, this is a student answer sheet for COAAP 54.1, the census questions. Note the numbering. And you'll see here, Roberta wrote it in a dark enough pen that it's easy to read and easy to score. And that's the goal. More remote testing tips. This is about oral responses. Again, use the existing oral assessments, rubrics, and rating scales already planned for your agency. Assessor would ask the question and note the response from the test taker. If possible, the test taker is viewed during the response using a video app like FaceTime, Skype, Zoom, Google Duo, if that's possible. Make sure illustrations and pictures are displayed properly, clearly on a phone screen. So they should not be too detailed, especially if you're using a cell phone. Phone screens are so small, even big ones. So using multiple illustrations at the same time, it doesn't work well. Use one illustration at a time and allow the test taker to respond in real time. Other agencies have also done this with Google Forms or Google Docs, and the illustrations come out just great. Responses to illustrations and pictures can be oral or written, and an oral response may just simply be the easiest, simplest, most secure method. But if written, something like the Zoom chat feature could work well for individual testing, or students may respond by texting from their own phones or sending a message through their computer. Text used in test documents should be very readable. So you'll note on this one, the font sizes for 12 font, it's very small and very hard to read. So at least get a 20-point font, or 24 is even better. So keep that in mind when you're sending prompts and that kind of thing on a phone. Here's a sample text size for a census task assessment scenario. So we're talking about the Petrov family. Note that the size is at least 20 size font, and it's very important to make it big enough so students can read that. Okay, look some ideas from pilot test agencies. And now the best thing is to use what students know. So if they're used to using Google Classroom, now with their distance learning class, then that's the best to use for assessments. Note that Google Docs and Google Forms works very well with that. The advantage of using a Google Doc or Google Form is that the instructor can switch on and off accepting responses based on the time allowed for the test. So you don't get students practicing ahead of time or sending it off to a friend. Pictures posted in Google Forms, as I mentioned, are really clear and easy to respond to. That's what agencies tell us. They really recommend starting slowly. Assess a small group of students first, see how it goes, maybe adjust, and work with students before the test date, the testing time, to make sure that they each have their app or their media player set up on their desktop, tablet, or their mobile device. And it's good to remember that you probably need to allow extra time beyond what you normally did in the classroom. So students might take longer to get logged on and access the test form. And in addition, the instructor could watch and assist the students till they get into the test, at which point they leave them on their own. For use of phone only, it is possible that the student reads out what goes in each field of the form, like on the census form. And they read that out to the assessor, and the assessor writes down the responses exactly as they heard them. Media could be used, as we mentioned. Lots of different types of media are being used around the state. Google Meet, Google Duo, FaceTime, Zoom, whatever's easily accessible to your students and they're familiar with. One instructor did a great job of giving the students the information for the test all at once by creating a QR code. You can generate a QR code by going to the internet and say generate QR code, and it'll give you some directions to do that. You get the QR code and then you post it for students to scan and access the Google form for the test questions. So they do that all at once. Very clever idea. Okay, so overall, let's just summarize that this is kind of a new process for all of us. It is optional. Agencies are not required to do that the spring, fall, summer, but it's great to get started and try it. We invite you to share your experiences, to make suggestions how it can be improved even beyond what we mentioned here, what really works for you, what doesn't. Your feedback on these assessments will be most helpful to the field in the future. Comments and questions. First of all, questions are in frequently asked questions document that will be posted on the website in the same area as this webinar. And your comments are very welcome at our network meetings that are coming up with your program specialists coming up in the next couple weeks. So hopefully you join those network meetings and keep in touch with them. You can also email your program specialist and ask questions or make comments. Give us suggestions. Give us feedback. Here's something to look at for your agency to reflect upon. Who will meet at your agency to discuss implementation? Thinking about what's the best technology for your students attending your classes right now. And will you plan on surveying students after the testing to see what they thought? Thank you for watching. I hope that this helped you get started. If you have follow-up questions, please ask your CASAS specialist. And we're happy to answer anything by phone, by email. We're here for you. All right. Thank you for watching. We'll see you at a network meeting soon.